Hello, you guys. Welcome back to the Until Jesus Friends Campus podcast. I am your host, Lauren, and today we're going to be continuing our series called My Testimony, where we get real college students to tell their testimonies. And so today we have Emma. She is a part of our life group, and she does a lot of things around here. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. My name is Emma, or Emma Grace. I'm a worship leader here at T-Rock, and I've been leading worship a long time, like since I was like 12. So I'm very passionate about it.
Period. And she has some vocals, some pipes, let me tell you. So today we're just going to dive right in. Yeah, let's just do it.
All right.
Okay, so kind of to get us started, where did you get introduced to the church? Like, how did that become a part of your life?
Well, I've been going to church since I was a baby. I was baptized as a baby in the Methodist church. And when I was going into first grade, my dad wanted to go to seminary to become a Methodist church pastor. So we moved to Kentucky, and we stayed there for 4 years while my dad did seminary. And then we moved back to Texas, and my dad started his journey in ministry. Well, he had already been working in ministry as a youth leader and as a worship leader, and then ministry as a pastor.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of been in church my whole life, always been around it and around the Bible and theology, and, learned all the things in Sunday school, and it's just always been a part of my life. And I've been saved as long as I can remember, honestly. I feel like maybe when you can say I was like saved was when I was in like third grade. Summer camp was the first time I feel like I had a one of those God moments during worship, and lifted my hands, shed a tear. Like, I think that's when I realized like this was the real deal. So I've known God a long time.
That's awesome. So kind of to like dive into like the deep part, I guess, of your story, where was your like finding Jesus moment? Like, where obviously you said you've been saved for a long time. But I feel like even because I grew up in the church as well, but there was like, I know not everybody has like a distinct moment, but where was the time where you felt like, okay, like this is where I'm really like finding my faith. This is where I'm like starting my chapter with God, all of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like I have new Jesus moments all the time.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like he always constantly has to remind me because, as humans, we're just like doubters.
Yeah.
So he always has to remind me, like, you remember when you realized I was the real deal? Why are you forgetting? So I guess the first time was, like I said, I went to this Methodist summer camp called Glen Lake. It's actually in Glen Rose, and sometimes the camp staff will come down to Tarleton and like talk to you about being a counselor. It's honestly like the veil between heaven and earth is very, very thin there. Like you can really just feel the presence of the Lord everywhere you walk there. And that's where I went to summer camp all growing up, ever since I was little. My last summer camp I went to this past summer, because that was like the last time you could before you're too old or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's really where most of my faith grew, was around kids my age who were just figuring it out themselves, and having counselors who were like college age and also figuring it out themselves, but they were all just great mentors, and God always met me in that place. So that was like my first like Jesus moment.
Yeah. So there's a long time from then to now. Where, like, get into the nitty gritty as deep as you want, but how has God worked from that time to now? How have you went through troubles, but seen God prevail through those and all of that stuff?
Well, I guess the most recent come to Jesus moment I had was my senior year of high school. I'm a freshman right now. I don't know if I said that. In college, obviously. Sorry. But my senior year of high school was really, really, really hard. I was not in a good place, I guess, not in a good place with God or myself. It started in December of my senior year, during the Christmas break. Some stuff happened that made me really question who I was as a Christian. Because what people don't tell you is if you are raised in the church, it's, I don't want to say more difficult, but it's a lot more confusing, because you're like, why am I still sinning if I've been saved? Why am I still going through all this stuff if God already did the work in me? Why am I still messing up?
And I think it's harder, like, because we've talked about this on the podcast before, because I'm very adamant about that too. Like, it's harder for you to find your true walk with Jesus when you've been raised in the church, because you just, like, know all the things for so long that you almost become, like, they just become, like, things to you. Like, it's not, like, there's not a special Jesus inside of you that is truly walking with you. Like, you know Jesus walks with you, but, like, do you really feel him walking with you, you know? And so I'm adamant about that, like, it is so much harder for people who are raised in the church, and especially, I'm sure you can testify to this as a pastor's kid, that it's even harder to. And I remember, I want to say it was like my sophomore, junior year in high school, our pastor's oldest son got saved at camp. And I remember just questioning him, being like, how does a pastor's kid get saved at, like, 15 at a youth camp? Like, haven't you been saved your whole life? And then I, like, God has showed me through time of, like, just because they're pastors' kids, or just because they're pastors or speakers or whoever it is, doesn't mean that they're, like, not real. Like, I think that's a perception that a lot of people have of people who grew up in the church, who are pastors' kids, who are kind of tied to that of, like, well, they just live a perfect life and they know God their whole life. And, like, you can know God but not, like, know God, you know?
And that's why you have so many kids growing up in the church who, like, almost feel fake, because adults in the church tend to just expect you to be perfect. Like, especially as a PK growing up, like, not even just in the church, like at school. When my dad first became a pastor, I did not sign up for that, because I was like, why is everyone expecting this out of me right now? Because I got to middle school, and I was bullied in middle school for all kinds of stuff that was stupid. But one of them was definitely that I was a PK, and they're like, you're a pastor's daughter. Aren't you supposed to be perfect? Aren't you supposed to, like, lead by example? And that almost made me want to lead less by example, because I'm like, well, if this is what they expect of me, I want to be the opposite. Like, I don't want people to just assume who I am just based on, you know, what goes on in my church life or with my parents, you know? And so that definitely, like, that first, like, 2 years of my dad being a pastor was, like, hard, because, like, these kids just expected so much of me, and I'm like, I'm a sixth grade girl.
You're like, I'm not my dad, I'm not the pastor, okay?
I'm not gonna be perfect. So, you know, I've always been just, I don't want to say bad, but I've always been, like, trying to contradict those views, which isn't necessarily a good thing at all, because I should lead by example as a Christian, but not as a pastor's kid, if that makes sense. Like, now I realize I want to be viewed as a Christian by my walk with God, not my dad's walk with God.
Right.
And I've really, like, grown in that, especially getting older and, like, going to college and separating from the Methodist church and starting to lead worship in the church that I wanted to lead in. And my dad was really supportive of that too. Whenever I did decide to leave the Methodist church, I was, like, 15 years old, and I'd still go with my family, like, on Sundays, but, like, Wednesday night church for youth, I'd go sing with a different church, and that was where my abilities and my gifts and my faith grew the most, is when I got to step out in my own story, I guess you could say. Like, I got to step out in my own walk with Christ and be like, this is where he's calling me, and I want to go do it. And my dad was hesitant at first, but after, like, super understanding and grateful, and he came out and would see me every once in a while and watch me, and he was really proud of me. But But yeah, I forgot where we were.
So kind of like from there, I mean, you've talked a lot about like middle school, high school. I know that a lot of your story comes from like your transition. I mean, your story comes from your whole life, but
Right.
from what I know, a lot of it is from like your transition from high school to college and kind of finding yourself. And Emma, oh my gosh, backstory on Emma, she signed up for a life group. We met at McDonald's for the first couple weeks, just me and Emma, because she was the only one that showed up. And through that, I mean, literally, I remember meeting you at McDonald's buyout actually, and she was like, I'm looking for Heather, which is our like worship director, and I was like, okay, she doesn't want to talk to me. But it was really cool, even like when we barely knew each other, and getting to hear your story and just how open you were of like, this is me, but I needed God to help me. And I don't know. I would get into a whole lot of your story, but I want you to be able to tell what you want. And so just kind of like that transition from, because I know, and for me, I've talked about it a little bit, but I struggled a lot with, like, I was very sheltered as a kid. And even in high school, like you with the football games, like my team, the drill team, would go and eat at Whataburger afterwards. My parents like wouldn't even let me do that. And so I came to college and went a little butt wild and was psycho for like 3 years. And so finding myself, but then I've obviously come out of that and have found a new walk. But I know that you have similar story but very different, so just whatever you want to tell of that.
Honestly, my buck wild crazy was when I was a senior in high school, because after the decisions I made in December, sins have natural consequences, let's just say that, and I faced a natural consequence that made me really question who I was as a Christian. It made me question who I was as a person. It brought back childhood trauma. It just brought back so many things and so many feelings at once. Yeah. And at first I was like, I was going to my parents for it, and I was going to God, and I was just trying to work through it in a good way. But at the same time, I started dabbling in smoking weed. And I know I just said weed on a church podcast. Sue me. But I started smoking weed just occasionally. It wasn't like a huge deal at first, but after I just started getting used to the feeling, and I realized, well, if I can do this here, I could do this at school. If I do this at school, I can do this at work. If I do this at work, I can, and it just became, I was never sober, ever, because I didn't want to face those feelings and those anxieties. Anxiety was the biggest one, honestly. Like, weed, if you didn't know this, is the biggest emotional suppressor, but it not only suppresses the bad emotions, it suppresses the good ones too. So when I was in that rut, well, first of all, every time I was high, or every time I wasn't high, I was a terrible person, like always angry. I would get in terrible fights with my friends. My best friend Bailey, bless her heart, because she's still stuck with me until now, but we were both not in a good place. She was going through some stuff with a relationship, and I was angry at her for the relationship, and she was angry at me because I was being a bad friend because I was always high, and I brought her into my mess, and it was a really low point for both of us, for all of us. And my friend Montana, who lived with me for a little bit, and then she lived with Bailey, and we were like a little trio group, but they definitely didn't like my company for a while because I was not a good person. And so fast forward about March, I was like realizing, like, this isn't good. I'm never sober anymore. It started to affect my singing, and if I can't sing, I don't know who I am, because that's a very big part of my life. But I was like, okay, I need to try to do something. And so I didn't really tell anybody about it, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to stop. And so I stopped. I was still smoking a little bit, but my tolerance was so high, it was like I wasn't really high anymore. I was just like trying to like not freak out from being sober because I was getting like terrible withdrawals. And it was my third day of trying to quit, and my dance coach, because I did drill team in high school for my senior year only because I got bored of marching band and I wanted to try something new. But my dance coach called me into her office and she was like, someone told me that you have been smoking weed in the locker room. And I just like bursted out in tears, and I was like, I don't know what to do with myself. And her name is Miss Hensley. I'm going to call her out because she'll probably never see this, but she was honestly like an angel to me that day because, oh, hold on. She was an angel to me that day because I was not okay. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Let it out. It's real life.
Real life sucks.
Testimonies come with emotions, and that's okay.
But she sat there and she just let me pour my heart out. I told her everything that I had been going through and everything that led up to that point. And I was like, I'm trying so hard to stop, but I can't. Like, I don't want to feel these things. And she sat there. She's a pastor's wife, which I think is funny. But she sat there and she just talked to me and she prayed with me. And from that point on, I did not stop smoking weed all the way. I'm not going to lie. I did not stop smoking weed after that. But I did start to get a little better until the summertime. And then I got in a relationship with a boy who did not know God. And honestly, I think I had also just lost a ton of weight because usually when you get weed, you get this thing called the munchies. But after you've been smoking it for so long and so consistently, it's the only thing you want in your body. So I wasn't eating. So I lost like 40 pounds. And I started getting a lot more attention. And so I guess I was just like caught up in that like, oh, I'm getting attention from boys again and all this stuff. And so I got in this relationship because he was going to Tarleton. And I was like, oh, we can get married. No. But we only dated the summertime, but it just wasn't a good for me. It like brought me back into my old temptations and my old sins, and I was smoking every day again, and it was like, just brought me right back to square one where I just wasn't in a good spot. He never wanted to come to church with me, and like, girls, if you're with a guy and he doesn't want to go to church with you, please don't keep dating him. Please don't keep dating him. It's just not worth it. He's not your husband. Let it go. Anyways, but towards the end of that summer, I was like, I felt God getting closer, and I wanted him to get closer, but there was like something holding it back. Obviously, it was the guy. It was me. But I was praying, and I was like, God, like, I hate this prayer because it never works well in my favor. But if he's not the one, get him out of here, please. And he broke up with me 2 days before duck camp. 2 days before duck camp. I had to go to the same duck camp as him. It was torture. But, I moved on. I moved past it. And I went to school. Started smoking weed a lot less. Still was smoking at this point. This was like beginning of first semester of my freshman year. But I was smoking less. I was doing better. I was still vaping. I don't think I said that part, but I was still vaping at this point. Towards, what was it? It was ladies' night. Mm-hmm. So we had ladies' night. When was that? Like November?
Yeah.
November?
It was like November, December, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so it had to be November. It was not December. It was November. Okay, sorry. Well, in November, I went to this ladies' night, and literally it was a bunch of college kids asking questions about their future husbands. And
that is
all
one
bonding.
thing we were actually doing like a Q&A this week, and I told Taylor, I was like, she was like, well, what do we like prepare for. Like, this is a little stressful because they ask questions like live and you just have to come up with answers. And I was like, well, prepare for like 90% of them to be about relationships and toxic relationships and how to get out of them and how to find the healthy ones and all of the things, because that is what college students love.
That's all they care about right now, especially the females. All they want is the husband, which I get your sister. That was me too. So I went to ladies' night, and that's like all we talked about. And Pastor Christy had said something. She was like, no, it wasn't Pastor Christy. It was Sierra. My friend Sierra, she also leads worship at T-Rock. She said, Emma, God did not promise you a husband. You know what he did promise you? Eternity. And if eternity isn't enough for you, then you need to reevaluate your situation. And that was a big eye-opener for me. I was like, okay, so I need to get comfortable with the fact that I may never get a husband.
Yeah.
First of all, which was so hard for me because that's all I've ever cared about. I'm a hopeless romantic.
We would come to church and Emma would be like, how are you doing this week? And she's like, good. I want my husband. And I'll be like, Emma, patience. And she'd be like, I am. And I was like, no, you're not.
Like, I'm ready to meet my Jimmy. That was our joke in life group, was all of our husbands' names, because we were all single at the time. We were like, his name is just Jimmy. Like, all of our husbands' name were Jimmy. I want to find my Jimmy.
And that was their prayer request every single week. Find a Jimmy. Find a Jimmy.
Oh my gosh. Well, anyways, so I go home. I wrote a song actually about that night, and one of the lines in the song that I wrote was, if your promise to me is nothing but eternity, I'll rejoice because I'm loved by God. I don't want to feel complete by another human or by a substance or by whatever temptations that I'm going through. Like, I don't want to feel complete through that. Like, and it's hard to come to terms with because it's tangible, and things that are tangible always feel more complete in the moment. But if I would just stick it through, it would get better, you know? So after ladies' night, I was like, all right, I took my vape, I threw it in the trash. I took my pen, I threw it in the trash. I told the people I was smoking with, I'm not going to smoke anymore, and I need you to hold me accountable. And I got an accountability partner, and I was like, I'm going to do this. And I was like, in prayer, I was just with God. I was like, I'm going to do this. And at first it was hard. I still hadn't quite gotten all the way out of it. But about a week later, I smoked for the last time on December 3rd. And since then, I've been sober almost 4 months. Yay. What was I talking about? Oh, sorry. I got off track. I literally a week after I made that decision, I met my boyfriend Caden, and I just thought it was so funny how God worked in that, because Caden actually got baptized that same week, and God was like, that's your man. I don't want to say husband, because like we have not been dating that long, but like,
hey, when God tells you, he tells you.
I don't know, guys. It felt pretty prominent. But I was like, this is a funny story, and everyone thinks I'm crazy when I say this, but like, when I tell you God's funny, he's funny. So like, I was like, no, he's not. Like, that's not my man. Like, there's no way. Like, you're just messing with, because me and Caden were friends, and I was like, you're just messing with me. And he was like, no, like, that's your man. And I was like, no, that's not my man. And I was like, he'll probably be like bald or something, and I don't want a bald man, so it's fine. And then, no, listen, because I have a point. I was like, I don't want a bald man. He'll probably be bald. And then God goes, will you turn around? And I was like, what? And I turn around. I see his family sitting there because he was getting baptized. And his dad has a head of hair. And I was like, oh, okay. Maybe. All that to say, God blessed me a week after I actually decided to like lay down all that stuff and just give it to him. And it was a lot faster than I thought it would be. And honestly, I was like, are you sure? Because you told me to be patient, and now you're just going to give it to me like that? Like, what?
It happens.
But, and I've realized now, I've been in the relationship for like 3 months now. I'm realizing that there is still a lot of patience that goes into that. Patience for the future with us, and patience for growth, and patience for each other, because I'm sure I drive him up the wall. But I was just blessed so quickly after I laid that down. That's not to say like that's always going to happen. Like, just because you stop doing a bad thing doesn't mean you're necessarily like automatically going to get blessed. Those things can take time, but there is blessing that comes with sacrifice. And there's always something greater that God has for you if you just take that step and get rid of it, you know? Something that I've learned since I stopped smoking is to feel your emotions fully and all the way. Like, I think I was just tired of crying. Honestly, I was like, I don't want to cry anymore. I don't want to be sad anymore. But after, like, just suppressing all my emotions, once I went through, like, quitting and, like, I guess you could say withdrawals, and I had to figure out how to manage my emotions again, because I hadn't been managing them for so long. Weed was managing them for me. So that was really difficult, but I've learned that if I just allow myself to really just feel what I need to feel and talk to God about it and, like, process what's going on without relying on a substance to make me feel better, I will get better faster. Yeah. And it won't be a problem as long. But I have to take the initiative and go to God with it. Otherwise, I'm just sitting in that burden by myself. And it's never good to just be by yourself.
Yeah. I think this is kind of off topic, but one of the things that Emma did when I, like, very first met her, and it's inspired me so much, because you were talking about, like, I don't even know. You weren't even talking about this. But when you applied to be on the worship team, you had, like, your little, what do they call it, assessment, and all of the things. And I remember her telling me on one of our little McDonald's dates, you said, I'm not going to lead yet because I, like, know that I'm not ready for that yet. And I think, like, that has inspired me so much, because even when Emma was in, like, her deepest, like, not even, I mean, I don't know if it was your deepest time or not, but when you were struggling really bad and you knew you were struggling and you knew you had to get right with God, a lot of people your age and even my age would not have, I mean, because I was active in the party scene and still, like, leading on stage. And so I think it's something so cool and inspiring to see that even people who, you know, like, people come from different walks of life and people have different testimonies. And we've talked about this so much in the past couple episodes, because I think the whole idea behind this was to show that not everybody's testimony is going to be the same. And I mean, Emma struggled with things that some people haven't. But people like Chase last week struggle with things and have been through things that Emma probably hasn't been through. And so I think that was the whole kind of point behind this whole series, was to show that, you know, people showing, one, how God has moved through their life and their testimonies, but also showing that not everybody's, your testimony doesn't have to be filled with, like, addictions or this or that, or your testimony can be what your testimony is. And just because, you know, you may hear Emma's story and be like, wow, I relate to that.
Right.
God has prevailed, and that God can do the same for me. But you can also look at Emma's testimony and say, oh, I haven't been through that, so I must not have a testimony. And that's not true at all. And so I think that's so cool. But I think to see even through all that you've, like, struggled with, and I've had the privilege of getting to know Emma and walk beside her for, what, like, a little over 6 months, I think so. 7, 8 months, I don't know. And getting to see how God has worked through her. But also, one thing that inspires me so much is that you are truly in touch with, like, what God is doing in your life, and you know that you're not perfect, but you've said, like, you know, at times I need to step back because I need to get right with God. But then we were talking about the other day about how Emma's now like going, and she's gonna apply to be on our lead team and do big things. And not that she, you know, like, not that you have to be perfect to do things in leadership at the church, or because I'm so adamant about it. And that's one thing that I like always want people to know, because I do get the privilege of leading a podcast like this and talking on stage at T-Rock, but just because I'm doing that stuff doesn't mean I'm perfect. And I still struggle with things, and I still struggle with temptations, and I still have things in my life that I struggle with, and I'm still a normal human. Like, just because you see people on stage at your church, or you see people leading in podcasts, or you see even people like Sadie Robertson is the first person that comes to mind, because you see her everywhere. She still struggles with stuff, and she's still a normal human, and she's open about that. And I think that that's something so real to learn. And I think that that's what I've learned a lot from you, is like knowing you are an amazing singer. And I'm serious when I say she has some pipes, because she can sing. But you're a real person, and you get to share that, and it's so cool. Yeah. So do you have anything else you kind of want to talk about, or is that it?
Just that I had to learn the, like, stepping back and be like, I'm not ready to lead right now. Yeah. Was something I had to, like, learn the hard way, because I was still leading when I was in the middle of, like, my big rut. And, like, I don't think, it's awful to think about now, because, like, I was just pouring from an empty cup, like, and people would tell me, like, I could tell something was different about your worship. Like, something wasn't right. It felt like more of a performance than worship. And I was like, I never want to perform, ever. Mm-hmm. I don't perform. I worship. And it's one thing that I feel like this generation needs, too, is just raw, real worship. Like, my generation's tired of the fakeness. Like, we're tired of pretending. Like, I want something real, and I know all my peers want something real. If you want something real, I'm giving you something real. This is my love for Jesus expressed in worship. And not everyone understands that, but if I'm not in the right spot to be showing people that, I shouldn't be showing people that right now. Yeah. Because you can't pour from an empty cup, and you need to figure out yourself and figure out how to I guess just be in a good place if it's just you and God and, like, the people that, you know, are good for you. But I think I just was never I was too prideful to, like, admit that when I was still in high school. And I was like, I just didn't want to give it up yet, because that was the only place that I felt purpose, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I realized that I don't find my purpose through leading worship. I find my purpose through God. Right. And God will use me in worship my whole life. I'm fully confident of that. He's told me a million times. He's prophesied so many things for my future that I'm just, like, so ready for. But it will not happen unless I lay my burdens down and I let him control my life. Yeah. And that's been a struggle, because he told me to go to Tarleton. I was like, why? I was like, why Tarleton? I want to be a worship leader. Why? Like, he was like, can you just trust me? I'm like, okay, whatever. And I've just been blindly following God my whole life. And just, that's, like, one thing that also, like, our generation struggles with, is letting go of control. Mm-hmm. And, like, I want to be in control of myself. I want to be in control of my life. You can't be in control of your life if you truly want to live for God. Right. You have to let him make every single one of those decisions for you, and you need to walk in obedience in those. And you can't do that if you're being hindered by living in that kind of sin. Yeah. You know, not saying I don't sin. I sin every day. Everybody does.
And I think that that's, like, something just really quick to touch on, because I don't want it to get misinterpreted, that you don't have to be perfect to be obedient in what he has called you to be. Mm-hmm. I mean, what God has called you to be. But I think that there is a sense of I'm looking for a word.
Surrender?
Yes, but there's a sense of like, when you know, like, you knew when you said you weren't ready to worship yet because you had things to get right. It's not because God couldn't use you in that time, but it's because Emma knew in order for God to fully use what gifts he had given her, she needed to be fully surrendered, and she wasn't yet.
Right.
And so that's not to say that you have to be perfect, because nobody's going to be perfect. And Emma can sit here and tell you, like, she still struggles with stuff and she still struggles with wanting to do things. And there will be moments in every single day that you have to continue to surrender. Like, you're not just going to be like, I surrender. And then, I mean, because you've surrendered your addiction to weed, but you can say there's still days where you're like, I really wish I could just smoke right now, but she has to surrender. And every single one of those moments, I'm not, because I'm surrendering to God. And so there's a constant surrender, but understanding that, yes, God can use you in every single time of your life, but there's a maturity of knowing when you are walking with Christ that maybe right now isn't the time, because I have to get right with God before I can lead other people to get right with him. And so I think that that's something so powerful about your testimony, but I don't want people to get misconstrued of like, you have to be perfect to lead, because that's not what you're saying at all. So yeah, that's all.
I struggled last night. Like, I had a friend with me. She had a vape on her, and I wanted to so bad, but I remembered like what God has given me since I gave it up. I remember all of his blessings, and is a buzz better than his plan for me? And it's not. And it's just something I have to remind myself of every single day. Like, I want God more.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to like actually feel that way, because he's not as tangible all the time, or really ever right now.
Yeah.
But I do, like, my soul, whether you know it or not, your soul will always crave God. We were made to crave God and crave eternity with him. And you have to remind yourself of that in order for that to be brought out into like your attitude.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, well, to wrap up, what is one piece of advice, just short and sweet, that you wish you could have given your younger self?
That the boys you tried so hard to impress are literally nothing to you now. Like, I feel like that was like a big struggle, like with me. My whole life was like, I wanted boys to like me. I wanted them to think I was cool, and I wanted them to think I was like, you know, whatever. And especially like when I was younger in middle school, I got bullied so much by these boys that didn't even know me. They didn't know my call. They didn't know what God wanted me to be. Yeah. And so like, I feel like that discouraged me a lot, because I thought like, oh, well, these guys say this, so I must not be worth this. But it's not true. And those people will never, ever, ever determine my worth or determine my plan, because I gave control to God, not to them. Right. So just that those boys do not matter, and they're not even cute. Period.
Well, that's a great place to wrap up. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing. I know it might have been difficult. Maybe it wasn't. I hope it wasn't that hard. But I'm confident that it will help at least one person. So thanks for coming on and sharing. We hope that today's episode helped at least one person, and that you guys found some truth in life in Emma's testimony, and hopefully how God can work in yours as well. And so, yeah, we will wrap up this series next week. So we hope to see you guys then. I guess not see you guys, but we hope that you guys tune in for next week. But until then, we'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.